So the consequence of the recognition of the emergence of nature too, in which we are in partnership, we're a symbiotic part, is the recognition that we are a part of the systems that we're observing, not separate. You may recall that cybernetics moved from a study of systems where there was an observer who was separate to this second order of cybernetics, where we try to understand systems when we're in the system, in the way I believe that quantum physicists try to understand the behavior of elementary particles, always and only within the context of them being observed by the person who is measuring their behavior. That to observe is actually to be involved in the definition of the particle. Now, I think that has lots of consequences. It does for art, where the idea of the author has been replaced by the active viewer. And I think it does in our relationship with the world, such that the idea of an interface between us and the system, which is the world, and to have that concretized into a little mouse or a touch screen or even a voice command, is a very quaint and a rather a passé idea, even though it's very much used by us. Conceptually, we're at the stage of recognizing that the interface is moving into the body. In fact, the body and mind become the interface to the system. Become the interface to the system. Inhabit the system, in other words. And so our ideas of location, in time and space, our ideas of presence in time and space have undergone radical revision. We understand both our presence and our location as being in flux, as being uncertain, as being as unstable and as uncertain as the elementary particle in physics. That we exist, we are present wherever there is an observer who chooses to interact with us. We are distributed through the telematic networks in that sense. Our presence is in telepresence. Now, I think that is the consequence of much more than simply a meaning that my face is digitalized and produced on a screen somewhere in Australia and someone can say, "Hi, Roy," and we have a conversation. I'm talking about downloading, distribution of memory, of all those elements that we say constitute a human being. We have to ask ourselves what it is now that constitutes a human being. And ultimately, I think it does come down to a question of presence in that sense. So, in that context, the question of death is not very high on the agenda. Death has meaning for a culture in which the unified, located, material, individual as a kind of materialistic item within an inventory of other items like buildings, war machines, people that a state might ideologically recognize, for example, just one kind of model of a human being, that in that model then death has a real meaning, both to the individual and to the state. No longer useful as far as the state is concerned, and no longer conscious as far as the individual is concerned, because consciousness was unified and contained within the body. In the sort of scenario that I have been trying to describe about the individual relating to something much here, which is called mind, not mind being contained within individual, for example, death is really not, well, let's say it's not high on the agenda, and certainly the death of the body is a meaningless statement. Which body? Which part of the body? What do we mean by body? We're cyborgs, we are bionic, we are in a post-biological state now. So what is this body? Where is it? Where are its limits? How are we going to define it? Because everything, it's very interesting, almost everything else in the world now, through the systems of artificial perception and so forth that we have, is no longer recognized in terms of its surface. We no longer say a tree consists in this bark and these leaves. We say this tree is a subsystem, an immensely complex and rich system of great complexity, of transference of energy, of transformation, which goes on. And of course, its significance, this system's significance, doesn't lie just in the bark or in the trees. I mean, to have the icon of tree is no longer meaningful to it. We're talking about highly complex systems which change according to the point of view. The reality of a tree, the identity of a tree, the existence of a tree depends on who is looking at it, for what reason, in what context. So, in that sense, context, both actually in art and even in the way we deal with life, is much more important to us in terms of decisions we make and action than content. And in that sense, the hyper context is what we reach towards. What is the hyper context of a system, of systems? Because, in other words, that will allow us a larger frame within which a multiplicity of viewpoints can take place. Remember, we're now in a world which has no reference, no common reference. So the creation of hypercontext is useful and perhaps important to us. The same goes for the body. We can't talk, if we talk about the body now, we're stuck with that language which implied this corporeality, extremely limited and finite kind. If we talk about the hyperbody, we're talking about a body which, not a specific body, not a specific definition, but a definition which depends upon the observer of the body. Just as the hyperparticle, so to speak, that's my phrase, it's not a scientific phrase, but the hyperparticle is all those possible states that a particle might take up.